And welcome back, everyone, to yet another edition of Going for Two, presented by our good friends at Home Field Apparel. I am your host, the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter, Matt Brown. I'm joined here by my colleague and friend, Bryan Fischer. And it is exciting to be able to talk to you, Bryan, after actual football games were played. How was your weekend? Was this a relief, an exciting time, anticlimactic? How are we feeling?
Well, it depends on if you're asking me or my wife. I'm sure there's maybe two different answers on that front. But no, it was fantastic to have college football back in our good graces. And luckily, because of the way the weekend is just structured with week one coming up, we only got to go 4 days without it. So that's the even better part. Is not only did we actually get some actual live college football on our screens, but we don't have to wait long for the next go around with a lot more teams across FBS.
Is the bringing the start of college football again a source of consternation in the Fischer household? Because it makes you feel any better. My wife Taylor and my children are very ambivalent about it as well.
Yeah, I think certainly it's different, especially with two young kids. Although it was nice to have my son was in my office with me, and I have a little area set up for him so that I can teach him all about touchdowns and what three wide means, and how we defend playing quarters and stuff. So I think that's one thing that is a bit different this year. But I think the thing about football season in general, and this is true for a lot of folks in college athletics, it does mean kind of the start of, hey, this is the fall season. It's not just football going on, for a lot of these campuses, but it's just busy every single day. It's not necessarily all about Saturday where you are, watching hours upon hours of games and then probably following up a little on Sunday as well. But like the thing about it is, there's press conferences on Monday and Tuesday. You got calls with people that you got to chat with throughout the week. There's pregame, and then it kind of all starts again on Thursday with some additional games. So it's like that. You throw in travel occasionally. I mean, it is a bit much, in terms of just the amount of hours you start working during the college football season. But as they always say, if you love what you're doing, it's not really work, and that's kind of how I feel about when football season rolls around.
That's definitely how I feel, especially at the very beginning, right? If I'm being completely honest, do I feel a little bit differently around like November 5th? Do I have the same pep in my step for a Wednesday night MAC game on Wednesday, November 5th, as I do for that same game played on a Friday in August? There's clearly a difference. And I know that's true for people we talk to as well. I feel a little bit better about it because I don't have to do 13-hour Saturdays like I did when I was at Vox, and I can watch some of those things on Sunday. I can kind of spread it out a little bit, but also because you're doing more during the day too. But it was exciting for in our household, right? I had my kids and I watched the Northwestern Nebraska game together. We kind of checked in with some of the stuff in the afternoon. The Solid Verbal had a live Chicago show. Some of our media friends in Chicago, and I went and saw that evening and kind of followed along with Hawaii. At the end, it was, I think, interesting in what happened on the field, and we can talk about a couple of those things, and some of them were funny and weird, and we have those, but there were also, I think, two off the field stories that are easy to kind of fall under the wayside, beyond the wayside, given the college football news cycle, but given what we talk about, I felt like we could spend a little bit of time talking through two of these. So then if we have time, we can make fun of Scott Frost like everyone else is doing, but I don't want these to go completely unmentioned. Bryan, I guess we're going to start with this one. Did you by chance watch any of the UNC Florida A&M game?
I did actually watched quite a bit of that game. Drake May at his first start, at UNC at quarterback, but I don't think that by far got any of the headlines, and especially credit to the ACC network crew that was kind of live and on site and promoting and televising that game. They covered the story with FAMU, pretty regularly to kind of update the viewers in terms of what initially happened and what kind of has happened. And we actually had some developments as we kind of tape early in the week in terms of the players themselves sending letters, but I'll let you get the ultimate background before we kind of get into it a little bit.
Yeah. The final score, in case you missed it, I did not watch the entire game. I kind of bounced around here a little bit. North Carolina wins 56-24. This was a competitive football game into, I would say, late third quarter into the fourth quarter. Like, I don't know if I ever felt like UNC was going to lose, but it was certainly, they had to work harder than maybe the final score might have indicated. That is not super uncommon for a week 1 or week 0 P5 FCS game. That kind of thing happens even with an HBCU. What was especially and this should be a good Florida A&M team, by the way. What was especially notable, though, about this game is it almost didn't happen. And when it did happen, Florida A&M was especially shorthanded. Leading up into this game, I believe, Bryan, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't have the final number in front of me. I think it was close to 20 members were unable to compete in this game because they were ineligible, not because of anything necessarily that they did, but because of compliance and certification issues being worked through. When an athlete transfers from one program to another, and I think anybody that's spent a lot of time in higher education knows this, even independent of the NCAA, there's a ton of paperwork that has to happen. Your major gets certified, the credit hours you're taking has to get certified to the NCAA to make sure that you're progressing towards a degree, that this credit hour is certified by this university and is applied to this major and moving forward. And, I remember as an Ohio State undergrad, this was, I think, my single most frustrating thing. As a guy whose email was brown.2600, it's very easy for someone to get lost in this bureaucratic shuffle. And that's at a place like Ohio State, which, for all of its faults, is this, a gigantic institution that has a gajillion of these people, not just in the athletic department, but serving the student body as a whole. Florida A&M, for lots of reasons, including historical and structural racism, does not have those resources. And, leading into this game, as there's the members of the football team had wrote a letter to the university president, pointing out that a lot of this wasn't our fault. And then we had to see the national media insinuate, or people on Twitter insinuate, that we couldn't play because we weren't working hard in school, when rather a lot of these were paperwork issues. And that part of that was because, the athletes are saying, our compliance department has one person, and that person doesn't have a lot of subject matter expertise in athletic compliance. And you got to certify 300 people quickly. It doesn't happen. Of course, there's going to be mistakes, man. I can tell you that last year, I am aware of at least one game, a Chicago State women's soccer game, that was canceled for this exact reason. They didn't have a full-time compliance director hired. They had a couple of people working behind the scenes. Between COVID, between injuries, and a handful of certification issues, the athletes literally could not get on the bus, and the game was canceled 5 hours before kickoff. This occasionally happens at the very beginning of the season with really low resource institutions. I can't think of a time, maybe you remember this, I can't think of a time where it's happened for a Division I football game. Not even an FBS football game, an FCS football game. I can't remember the last time that it's happened.
Yeah, and a lot of that is just because, because football starts so much earlier in terms of the calendar process, usually the compliance is processing a lot of the kind of paperwork stuff for a lot of their players, really for the past month, and then other schools, other sports are going to get on campus a little bit later. So there's more time for that. And that's one factor, but you kind of mentioned just the inherent structural problems that place at a lot of HBCUs, and I think, FAMU in particular going through a transition right now. They've been without an athletic director for going on several months, going back to May when Courtney Gosha left. He's now at Tulane, and they've, from what I've been told, they're kind of narrowing down that search. They should have an AD candidate. I think they've actually interviewed candidates last week, as a matter of fact. Some of them. So, they're narrowing down. So you have a department that has interim leadership. They don't have, I believe they only have one full-time compliance officer right now, which is a bit of an issue. They're actually hiring somebody else to help staff up that department. But, that's a hiring process that still has to, kind of run its course. So got a lot of paperwork on kind of one person, and probably some assistance, maybe some help from the actual schooling universities that might be able to contribute to some of these compliance forms. But it's a lot on one person, and made even more so by the fact that this is a week 0 matchup, and you kind of got to start even a little bit earlier to go up there and play. And so I think you run into a lot of that. I understand what the frustration from the players, just in terms of, you hear academic ineligible and all that, and how that kind of paints them in a broad brush. Totally understand, why they are frustrated with the situation, because this is on the administration, and it is not fair for them. And it is something that should have been looked at far beyond, kind of going into the right that that bus trip down to take it to North Carolina. So a lot of frustration I know from the coaching staff that they just not knowing you didn't have any players that you were counting on, especially some starters going into a big matchup like that. I mean that's tough on them. But yeah, like you said, they fought pretty hard, especially early on in that contest. I mean they were competitive for a good 2.5, 3 quarters, and this is not no, probably more cause for concern if you were on the UNC sideline, given that they're bringing in Gene Chizik and rebooting the defense and starting a new true freshman at quarterback. Like there's probably some more UNC focus nowadays. But yeah, you're right for FAMU in particular. I mean, this is it was just a tough way to start the season, and a lot of it was basically just because of inherent issues within that department that they've got to get squared away first and foremost. Hopefully, once they start making the AD hire, can kind of go from there.
Yeah, definitely a perfect storm of institution that's already resource starved and not a whole lot of margin of error. Interim athletic director, shorthanded compliance department, expedited timeline. Looking from the outside here without knowing all the facts, if one person messes up and you have a roster that's in transition, you can see how something like this, while very unfortunate, might happen. Let me ask. I'd like to know what you think about something, because as I understand it, ahead of this game, due to injury and attrition and ineligibility issues, Florida A&M was traveling to this game with 7 offensive linemen. And I don't actually think it was 7 scholarship offensive linemen. I think it was 7 offensive linemen. Because remember, FCS team does not have 85 scholarships like an FBS program. And it is, I don't know off the top of my head if this is true for Florida A&M. It's not uncommon for HBCU programs, for SWAC and MEAC programs, to not fully fund the maximum of 61 or 62 allotment. Like to have something in the 50s is not uncommon. I'm aware of a couple of schools that have even gone a little bit under that. So whether it's 7, it's probably not 7 linemen on full scholarships traveling up here to face a high resource, very hot weather ACC team. And I saw some academics and some commentators say, why are we playing this game? Because it's not like it's expected to be terribly competitive anyway. You're not going to learn a whole lot necessarily from this game. And now there might be some legitimate safety issues. I don't know off the top of my head, like what the actual minimum requirement is here, but what would you say to somebody who said, what are we doing if we only have 7 linemen that now need to go, face, 60, 70, 80 plays against an ACC program?
Oh, we kind of have seen it in the past, when you go back to kind of the true thick of the COVID seasons, in terms of a lot of the conferences put out minimums in terms of number of offensive linemen you can have. And, if you're typically, if you have the 53-man roster in the NFL, you're probably carrying more than that, probably 8 or 9 going into a game, depending on injuries and or situation and who the opponent might be matching up. But the tough part is you're going into games expecting, if you're a head coach, if you're an offensive line coach, some of those guys to go down. Just the nature of that position. Guys fall into your knee and you get banged up. It might be a couple plays. You might lose a guy for the entire game in the first quarter, and that's why you talk about offensive line depth. I mean that is critical, and safety issues. I maybe you can kind of make that case. I'm sure coaches would, just to kind of protect themselves a little bit. But you as long as you can trot out 5, I think you're good to go. But at the end of the day, it's just a depth question, because you are going to lose guys throughout the game, and you never want to be in the case of kind of going back to maybe your high school days, where you got to kind of like, all right, well, we're down to like 5 guys. All right, defensive tackle.
Yep.
You're coming over here on the offensive line now, and you're gonna play guard for us.
Tight ends, right? Who on my roster is over 250 pounds and could stand up for a couple of plays?
But yeah, I mean, it's just a tough situation to deal with, and that's kind of the one, probably the key position where I know coaches just are super concerned about their numbers and having enough depth. It's hard to find those guys first and foremost, and then to find them, in kind of the heat of battle with as important as they are to offenses. And you kind of saw it a little bit. I think that was kind of probably, if you're again a Tar Heels fan, seeing the new defense, seeing the lack of pressure, especially early on in the game against an offensive lineman that kind of banged up and didn't have the numbers that you kind of expected, much less, kind of playing that at the level. That was probably a little bit more concerning for those fans in Baby Blue. But credit to FAMU. I mean, they came in, they competed, And I think that was the one takeaway that I kind of had, is that, given all the adversity that they faced, you know what, they came in, and especially early on, they said, you know what, we're here to play, and that was at least encouraging. We'll see kind of the ramifications and how things go there in terms of the administration and where the school goes from there. But credit to those players for going out and eating early.
Yeah, they absolutely was a credit to their team and the coaching staff and how and the relationship that they have there with each other, how they played, especially in the first half. I have some sympathy to the argument that maybe we shouldn't be doing this. I would say, particularly for an FCS FBS game where maybe you might only have like 4 full offensive lineman scholarships at that kind of level. I also understand that, hey, if you cancel this game, it's UNC loses a lot of money because that now they lose out on home ticket revenue and concessions and parking and those things. And if they scheduled another game, maybe you play an FCS opponent later in the season, which sometimes happens. Now suddenly you're missing a midweek bye week, and maybe that has health and safety concerns, especially because you've been practicing all week like you're going to have a game. That has health concerns for UNC's athletes. A big reason why FAMU played this game, of course, was their contract required it. I actually have the contract here in front of me. They were going to be paid, it looks like $450,000 for participating. And when you have an athletic budget under $30 million, that money matters. And also, if they canceled the game with that short notice, they would owe another $450,000. So that's a $900,000 swing, which might make up your earned revenue from tickets for the entire year. That's more than you're making from media rights, I believe, for a year. That's a huge chunk of money. It's a big chunk of money for most schools, but even a Mountain West program, if they really had to do it, could probably find a way to do it. That's not something that's possible. So it just goes to show how unfortunate it is for athletes to then have to shoulder financial burdens and kind of get beat up in the press a little bit, and then get physically beat up by an opponent where they were kind of playing with one arm behind their back. Really kudos to them for hanging in there. And here's hoping that they have a successful season where, one, this off the field stuff, like how quickly they get their financial aid checks, hope that gets turned around immediately. And then they're able to have a successful season on the field.
Yeah. And I think you can also kind of set this type of story against the backdrop of something that we have also talked about in transformation. A lot of the potential requirements for things like getting access to men's basketball tournaments, just being a Division I member now, in the future, is going to be tied to potential minimums regarding people like compliance officers, to where you can't just have just
exactly
one, you can't just have 1 or 2 trainers, which has been an issue for a lot of these programs as well. Like some of those issues that we are starting to see crop up at a lot of these schools, they're going to be even bigger going forward if they want to truly Division One. That's going to be something that a lot of these programs, if you're FAMU, you're going to have to make the investment. Not just in terms of people, but making sure that your program is staffed and kind of ready to go for the kind of new era. Even if you're going to remain in the FCS, there's going to be some changes coming your way, and this is kind of a big early warning sign if you're kind of the university leadership as you're going through this process of hiring a new AD. That's kind of got to be in the back of your mind as well. Like we're going to have to fundraise some more. We're going to have to maybe tap into university resources some more, because we're going to have to get back up to kind of those minimum standards and things like compliance. So not only do these things not end up happening again, but also that we can kind of figure things out going forward to where it's much easier for a lot of folks.
It's a good point about the transformation committee, and I've talked to a couple other people that are like, well, I don't think the NCAA is going to really kick HBCUs out unless they absolutely have no other choice. So I don't know what classification some of these schools are going to be in here, but you definitely need to be able to meet a minimum standard, and funding things like summer school for athletes that really have to be on campus all year, like most Division I football players do, and making sure that they get their money on time. That's a minimum standard. That's a minimum standard that you should be able to clear at Division II, let alone Division I. I realize that's a frustrating off the field story. There's some positives to take away on the field. Hopefully they get resolved there on the back end. There's another off the field story that I do want to talk about that has nothing to do with football, but does kind of intersect with a couple of my interests here. For folks who might have missed this, I want to say this was on. I think this did happen on Saturday. There was a Duke BYU women's volleyball match. Matches in Provo, sellout. Both programs are competitive on a national stage. Thousands of people are there, and reportedly, one of the women's volleyball players here for Duke, a young woman named Rachel Richardson, releases a statement. Her godparents released a statement on social media saying that she was repeatedly targeted by really vicious racial taunts. And that went beyond just racial slurs, but that people were saying stuff to her about being careful when you get back to the bus. They're very ugly things, and I believe the video broadcast shows that a police officer goes over to Duke's bench. Richardson says that volleyball officials during the match and people at BYU were made aware of what was happening. Nobody, for whatever reason, made proactive attempts to stop it. Afterwards, BYU releases a statement saying, we went back to the video. We found the fan. Fan wasn't a student. Fan was sitting with the students. We banned that person from campus. Athletic director Tom Homo gives a statement, later, encouraging BYU fans to elevate their standard of conduct and their obligations given their sponsoring institution about treating people equally. The Duke was scheduled to play another game in Provo. They play at a different site away from BYU's campus. The volleyball player has reached out and said some things on social media. So there's been a lot of follow-up conversations, and I still have several myself, because I feel like the timeline's been muddled a little bit, as one would expect with an event of this magnitude. And first, I guess I'm going to say something that's going to, I think, paint me as naive and out of touch. But I have to be honest, Bryan, it literally never occurred to me that somebody would say such vile things at a women's volleyball game. And I say this like, if you told me there was racial slurs at a basketball game or a football game or a different sport where there was going to be 10,000 people in the audience, I would say that's terrible. It's unfortunate. Could I believe? I mean, but is that a thing that could happen? Yes. People, I've been in student sections. I've been in these games. I've heard people say terrible things. It never occurred to me that at a volleyball match, that's something that might happen, regardless of where it might happen. But here it appears that it has, and it's raised some big questions. Some big questions about what is owed operationally, what is owed from the administration, from Duke, from BYU, and some other factors here as well, to make sure that something like this hopefully never happens again.
Yeah, and to be clear, just for timeline purposes, I believe the match took place on Friday night.
You're right. That's right. Friday. The reports were coming in on Saturday. Yeah.
The story was kind of when it blew up. Was early Saturday. Both
right.
from the player's godmother tweeting about the incident itself, and then BYU they eventually released a statement. So that's that. But you're right. I mean, like to see this happening at a volleyball match. I mean, that to me was like. That made me caused me to do a double take. Like wait a minute, what's going on? Why is BYU, releasing the statement? And I also have a lot of questions about why there was not more proactive, steps being taken in the venue during the game itself. That to me is where the real breakdown occurs, because if this athlete was hearing this, it does sound like her teammates were. It does sound like Duke made BYU aware of the issue. Why were there not more proactive things? And BYU's statement kind of said, we tried to identify. Nobody kind of raised their hand to say that who it was. Like, if this was a non-student in the student section, which is what their statement originally says, I would think you could be pretty easily figure out who that is. And the fact that people around that person did not kind of point them out to police or ushers or whoever was involved at BYU, that is a red flag to me. And it's another bad mark against the BYU community, who I don't think this certainly values represent, but like it did happen on the campus, and it is a serious accusation, and it is something that a lot of folks around there need to kind of look around and say, how can we not only make this situation is made right for the student athletes and for Duke itself, but also how can we make sure this does not happen again? But
no, this it's a great point. I do want to talk about that. Something else I've been trying to find the best way to articulate, and maybe this show is a good medium for it, right? Most people listening to this know I'm LDS. I have not lived in Utah. I did not go to the school, but I am a member of the church of this sponsoring institution. I also have, my mom was from Brazil, and I do have a fair amount, I think, of lived experience within the LDS community, particularly as it pertains to maybe how people who look a little bit different or act a little bit different can be treated. Because I saw this a ton on Twitter, and you see this in the comment section. Anytime anybody's talked about this story, it's like, well, this is a racist institution. It's a racist sponsoring church. They have a very terrible racial history. Like, are you surprised? And like, I look at this and think, I am surprised, and am I surprised because I do not think that there are problems with racism within LDS church communities. No, like I could tell you, friends, that's a thing, and you don't need to go, explain the history to me. I've written like 10,000 words about the Black 14, man. Like I know this history. I've read all the same stuff that you're throwing to me here. In my experience, when looking at this, the idea of somebody using the N-word or using this level of explicit language does fly against how I have seen this activity. Is there racism in this community in a way of trying to be more subtle or less flagrant, but still extremely hurtful to people? Of course. Are there problems, racism that comes up because leadership throughout a lot of this institution and a lot of local communities does not have cultural competencies because there aren't a whole lot of people of color that are leading congregations or in leadership positions in a lot of in the church or at the school and other places? Yeah. And that's a different podcast. You want to talk about why that is? I can tell you why it doesn't happen, but like that's probably a different episode. So like I don't want to get the church off the hook or insinuate that this isn't an issue, right? And I know you spent a fair amount of time in Utah too. There are demographic realities of that state, and you could see how issues could happen. Not like this, but I don't think it's a shock that any place where one ethnic group tends to completely dominate, how there may be signals mixed in some other places here. What is especially frustrating to look at this experience, the after fact, is I think it is hard, in part because of that history, for a BYU leader or somebody high up within the church to say, wow, a racist thing happened. It's easier to use other couching language. An unfortunate incident happened. Language that did not live up to our standards happened. We failed to follow, uplift our Christian standards happened. Those things are true. It was also racism. And I know that people are terrified of being accused of being racist or accused of all the things that are happening right now on social media. And I understand why people are hurt about those, and not all of those attacks are fair. You do have to call the thing that happened what it happened. And I would look at that and say, based on my experience and my vantage point as being part of this community, I do believe that is a blind spot. And it is something that I think in many ways, I think that athletic department, university understand. It's not an accident why many of those coaching staffs are more diverse than almost any other place you're going to see in contemporary U.S. Mormondom, and why they've talked about it and they appear on these subcommittees and everything. So I want them to do better. Not because, I want them to do better because in part because that's a reflection on me too, right? And a reflection on this world. But I also want them to do better because we owe it to ourselves as members of the human race and as participants in this sport and in this community to treat people better and to make sure that happens. I see a lot of people, a lot of outlets or people online within Utah or within this cultural world of being very defensive. I understand it. I know it hurts. I know it's uncomfortable. You got to do it. You got to lean into it. And what you had kind of touched on, regardless of what happened operationally during the game or what BYU did or didn't do, sounds like they messed up. I'm trying to learn more. And part of that is because I don't really know a whole lot about what happens operationally during women's volleyball games and whose responsibility would be to direct the police officer here or there. I don't know. It may very well be that they messed up. What I do know is that event happened and somebody said those things and a bunch of somebody sitting around them almost certainly heard them and didn't say anything. And that should inspire some very difficult introspection to anybody involved about why that didn't happen. Because I slept through a lot of Sunday school. I slept through a lot of early morning seminary. The don't use racial slurs lesson, that sunk in pretty easily, I think, in my ecclesiastical training and the idea of God not being respecters of a person and what we owe to each other, that sunk in. So if that was missed here, we got to ask ourselves some tough questions as to why.
Yeah, that's well said. And I think you and I both know a lot of folks, that work at the athletic department at BYU, and
Yeah.
certainly, this doesn't kind of reflect a lot of their values. I mean, truly, they, especially since Tom Homo has kind of taken over, they've been kind of almost going out of their way to make sure they are more accommodating, more, kind of accepting of everybody, making sure everybody has a good experience there at BYU, and putting some of that nebulous past behind them. I mean, just seeing the progress on campus locally with issues like LGBTQ issues, that's come a long way, even given their church ties these last couple of years. So, I think that the problem, is a greater one beyond just BYU, and
Had a long way to go
yeah,
on that front. I don't know if I'm ready to throw BYU a parade for that yet,
no,
but
no, but
I
I'm just
definitely understand it has come a a long way. No,
yeah,
that is true.
you're starting a little bit further behind from
Yeah,
a lot of folks, for a lot of other campuses. But like, look, the racism is a issue with this country. It's unfortunately been
yeah,
even more magnified these last 6 to 8 years or so, even more so. And I think that's something that I think everybody has to be acutely aware of. And this is something that is not limited to BYU. I mean, you hear racist incidents like this, across the sporting landscape. I mean, like as a lot of people know, I'm big on European soccer. It seems like every week, there's some incident, that ends up making the news story. And what are those
yeah.
leagues doing in terms of reaction? That is to me, where my viewpoint on this, kind of comes into mind with BYU in terms of what was ultimately happening, in the moment, and how operationally you can get better on that front. I think that's something that administrators across the country can kind of say, hey, let's take this incident, let's learn from it, let's teach our security guards, let's teach people to kind of spot this stuff. Because if in a European soccer game at a 60,000 seat stadium, if they're able to hear it on the pitch, and then point out fans, or what sections, and they remove quickly some of those patrons, that is something that easily can come to this side of the Atlantic with whether it be a football game, whether it be volleyball games like this. You can teach your people to do things the right way. And that's where this can be a learning experience, not just for BYU moving forward, but for a lot of athletic departments out there that need to protect their student athletes as best they can, and especially protect those visiting student athletes to not only make sure that they have a great experience when they come to compete, but understand that this is not acceptable in any manner, much less in general society, and in general life, much less at an NCAA sporting event.
You're exactly right. I think that's a great comparative example. This is something that is an issue in most European soccer leagues, and being able to identify those people, and make sure that there are codes of conduct that are expected. I'm was checking in here with a buddy of mine that covers BYU, for one of the local outlets. They were saying like, hey, I'm at a soccer game right now, and there's not a whole lot of people here, and they read that over the PA. I'm like, hey, if you see something, say something. That's right, because while there are things unique to this campus and this community and this county and this history, where you could say like, okay, I could draw some straight lines, see why this happened. Could I also see a place at another PWI that's 88% Caucasian, at a different sporting event, saying something that would be really offensive? Yeah, like that could happen unfortunately, that could happen in a Montana, that could happen in South Dakota, that could happen in Ohio or Tennessee or Vermont, or any number of other places. It would look different, but something bad can still happen. So I think you're right. This is a lesson for operationally, and what you want, what culture you want to have, that I hope is discussed everywhere. And I think the last thing I'll note is, I think we are all fortunate that that Rachel at Duke uh, took some real leadership with this, and explained, hey, this is exactly how I felt. Here's what happened. Here's what our teammates want the world to know. Here's what I want the world to know. And I think it sucks that in a lot of these kind of situations, there is a disproportionate burden placed on the victim that's placed on the student. I think it would have been nice to hear more from other people at Duke, before we heard, or in conjunction with hearing from the athletes themselves. I will say, both in this experience and in most of my professional experience, the more we hear from the athletes and the better we get to know them and hear from them, the more impressive they are. And especially when compared to maybe sometimes some of the adults, whether that's defending themselves when they've been the victims of something, or celebrating their own accomplishments, or letting us, as the world, get to know who they are as people. I am grateful for her statement, and grateful for however she wants to shed some light on this and move forward from it, whatever makes sense for her, because that's a hard thing to ask for a sophomore or junior. It wasn't all depressing and existential and everything over here these the past couple of days, but those are two fairly big questions that I think for our audience demonstrate, hey, this is why it's important to have the excellent in this and this and this and this other department, to make sure that the focus is on the athletes themselves and their successes and their triumphs, rather than we messed up paperwork, or we failed to monitor some assholes that got into our student section, or maybe we have not been we haven't set an expectation as a community the way that we want to, because all that stuff shapes what you do see on Saturdays.
Yeah, and I'll say that seeing those issues pop up in week 6 or 7 is a whole different thing than seeing some of the issues pop up in weeks, especially after it does seem like this is a fairly normal college athletics season, and so I feel like that people's whether fan behavior or whether just kind of getting back into the flow of things. Things can be a little bit slow for a lot of these athletic departments as they kind of get back into the swing of things. With sellouts, we already seen a lot of these places, whether week 0 or week 1, and out some massive sellouts. So I feel like the appetite for college athletics has never been greater going into the year. And if you're an administrator out there, you got to keep that in the back of your mind. Sometimes that means fans are going to do some stupid things. You got to adjust and be aware of that. Already facing staffing issues. I've noticed, just chatting with some folks across the country, whether it be security, whether it be concessions, that those type of issues are still popping up. So some teething issues for sure in college athletics. But the good news is we did get some action back on the field.
Who hasn't struggled to get back onto the swing of things and nail things right from the get-go? That would be our good friends at Home Field Apparel. I was trying to find a good way for us to dig out of this ditch, because I don't think to help the good brand, but I'm always happy to talk about the good brands who finished their final big new Saturday campaign with, of course, my beloved alma mater, the Ohio State Buckeyes. I'm wearing one of their shirts right now. We're talking about a Going for 2 podcast. It makes sense to wear a Going for 3 shirt. They were unfortunately unable to beat Penn State. Hopefully that happens on the field this year. But Penn State will forever be your big new Saturday champions for selling stuff on the first day for our friends at Home Field. I have been told that just because they're not doing big new Saturday anymore, they are going to drop a bunch of new schools. Through trying to do some FOIA research on EA Sports video game, I have learned of 2 schools that are G5 schools that are going to be releasing Home Field collections later this year. But you can buy a bunch of cool stuff right now, including the Indianapolis Colts. They've launched into the professional side. I don't know anything about the Indianapolis Colts. I don't think I could name 5 people on the Colts. This is not that kind of podcast. I'm not that kind of sports fan. They do look cool as hell, though. And you can find all of those at homefieldapparel.com, whether you want t-shirts, hoodies, stickers for your favorite collegiate brand with fun, unique vintage iconography, or the Indianapolis Colts. I don't know if other professional teams will be coming soon. I can't really foil with them, and Connor hasn't told me, but maybe the Colts won't be the only one. I don't know. The only way to know is to go throw money at them. And when you do, use promo code EXTRAPOINTS to save 15% off of your order. Funnel some money to us to help support this show and support our friends, the good brand in beautiful Indianapolis, Indiana.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a local tie-in, obviously, with the Colts there, but it's some snazzy looking gear, and hopefully a lot more NFL teams can get on board, because you go back some of those like old Eagles logos. Oh man, I tell you what, that's just like made for some Home Field doggers. So hopefully a good brand can get in the good graces of the big old league, and we can see a lot more. But hey, I am happy enough with the amount of content they already have on the college front, and what else is coming as well down the pipe, because it sounds like it's some pretty exciting new designs coming our way.
Who's the quarterback for the Colts right now?
That would be Matt Ryan.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Who did they trade for Matt Ryan? Just picks?
Yeah, just basically kind of picked him off the scrap heap as Atlanta kind of moved on. He was really not too happy about the Falcons kind of getting in on the Deshaun Watson trade sweepstakes, which in retrospect you can definitely understand. And so he asked for a way out, and so he's made his way to Indianapolis. And I think they're one of the more intriguing teams in the AFC this year.
This is one of this. I'm sure I should have known this, but my brain has been ruined so much that what you just described feels like it happened 7 years ago.
Yeah. I was doing some more NFL preview stuff for Athlon, the other day, and just like kind of going through, it's like, man, it feels like the longest off season, especially because so much has been dominated in terms of the Watson talk and whether what's going on there, and how many games he's going to get suspended, and there's finally clarity around that. But it's like, what, there's a ton of intriguing storylines in the league this year, and I think that's kind of the same in college football. Outside of kind of, all right, we know Alabama's going to be good, we know Ohio State's going to be good, yeah, Georgia's probably going to be kind of right there with them again, but like after that, there's a whole lot of intrigue, a whole lot of storylines, in college football and the NFL, and that's what makes for a fun start to the season, as hope reigns supreme, whether you're a pro football fan or you're a college football fan now.
Speaking of hope, there's one place I would like to quickly talk about before we wrap up here that now seems bereft of hope. And I don't want to dogpile on, but I kind of do a little bit because for whatever reason, making fun of this program is funny. Have we seen our last Scott Frost day? After now seeing this game, I believe, for the 17th consecutive time.
Well, I wouldn't put it past Scott Frost resurfacing in a head coaching gig elsewhere after the season. But
he's not old. I mean, I don't think he's a terrible football coach. This is just the math doesn't math on this. You would think that it's impossible to keep losing this many close games, and yet.
Well, yeah, and I think the one thing that I keep in the back of my mind is why this is such a pressing storyline for really the entire industry too, is just the way his new contract was kind of reworked and his buyout structure to where it makes it very easy to kind of get rid of him come October. They play Oklahoma, then they have a bye week, and then it's kind of into the Big Ten schedule. But like, there's definitely the ability for Trev Alberts there to kind of pull the ripcord early and get this college coaching carousel started very early with a pretty marquee opening. You got to keep in mind that like there's going to be some movement. Certainly Auburn is one to kind of keep an eye out, but Nebraska, in terms of kind of big time openings, they're going to be right near the top of the list. They're opening a brand new palatial facility, pretty soon. Like that, they've got all the resources there to have a winning football team and kind of get back to maybe not the heights that they were back in the 90s or anything like that, but they should at least be able to kind of get back to the Bo Pelini era 9-3 caliber, especially given the in the Big Ten. But that is going to be a very interesting storyline. It's just kind of what when Nebraska might end up making a move on Scott Frost, whether they kind of keep him around. He is kind of beloved, certainly there, by that fan base, by the administration, that they all want him to do well. But at the same time, I mean, it's just like a constant stream of reminders that he's the common thread throughout all of these issues, whether it's, losing late, whether it's kicking onside kicks at the wrong time, inopportune times, blowing all these late leads. I mean, just not being able to finish at the end of games. The common thread is Scott Frost. He's changed assistant coaches. He's recruited different guys. He's brought new guys in. Like, it just, at the end of the day, there's one common thread, and that all points in one direction. And as tough it is, to Cannon alum who has brought so many beloved memories back in the day for a lot of Huskers fans, that might be what we're kind of staring at, especially if things get ugly in that Oklahoma game.
The Oklahoma game does seem like a pretty fascinating bellwether. So if you'll indulge me real quick for a quick podcasting trope, which is, in case you've forgotten Nebraska's schedule off the top of your head. One, they didn't schedule a bye week immediately after a trip to Ireland.
I noticed that too.
That's right. And like, they're playing North Dakota, who's not North Dakota State, but they're not bad.
Well, as we got into on the last podcast with Sam Herden in our FCS preview, I mean, North Dakota is one of those mountain Missouri Valley football conference teams that is very competitive, week in, week out. We saw them a couple of years ago. They pushed Minnesota, to the brink. So like, this is not an easy pushover FCS game as you kind of get back. And I can understand that it is a little bit easier traveling from, if you're kind of, or you've kind of made your plane trip already, you're flying back. I think they arrived at like 3 a.m. Back in Omaha is actually where they flew into last week. So you can maybe, I guess, understand that, you just kind of want to get, maybe you value that extra bye week later in the season a little bit more. But it just, given all the NFL teams that have done it and gone across the pond, most of them schedule, that extra bye week afterwards, which, we'll see, because it's going to be a tough turnaround and a lot of attention on that game in particular. So it's as much as you had the tough loss. You got to turn right around and you got to kind of lay it on UND because the negative headlines are not going to stop.
No, they're not. Northwestern has a bye that week. Nebraska does not. So they have North Dakota, Georgia Southern at home, back-to-back weeks. They should be favored to win both of those. You are home for Oklahoma. You played Oklahoma really tough last year on the road. This Oklahoma team on paper right now doesn't seem quite as good as last year. So they're still preseason top 10 team. I would agree with a bye week after that game. If Nebraska gets murdered, that would be a question. But then, okay, so let's say you lose close because it's a Nebraska game. Like that's kind of what happens. You're 2-2. You're heading into the bye week. October 1st, that Saturday, homecoming. You're hosting Indiana, and Indiana does not project to be very good this year. They could go over in the Big Ten, and then you have road games at Rutgers and Purdue before another bye week. You could, even if you're not that good, you could win all three of those games. Those aren't necessarily easy ones, and suddenly you're 5-2. You're heading into late October, and now you're in the all-star receiving votes category again.
Well, what's really interesting, especially about that schedule in particular, is so number one, Scott Frost's buyout drops on October 1st. He goes from 50 million to about 7.5 million, which sounds like a lot, but let's face it, this is the Big Ten. We all know what those media deals are getting. Yeah. That's not going to be an issue if they wanted to move on from him after October 1st. Yeah, but you mentioned the schedule. I mean, Rutgers, Purdue, Illinois, kind of some of those Big Ten West teams. Like, if you get on a roll and you want to make a change, do you want to kind of be proactive? We kind of saw Texas Tech do this last year where the administration kind of said, you know what, this is not really working out. We want to kind of get on a move on, not only on our search, but we don't want to have that head coach kind of get some momentum to where they make a bowl game or they win 8 or 9 games and then we can't fire them. Right. So I think this is going to be a big decision for Trev Alberts in terms of timing and in terms of getting the market started for sure, right around October 1st. But I think a lot of it can come down to, can they be competitive with Oklahoma and win that game possibly? But, there's going to be some hard decisions either way. I'm not sure this is a true season killer, but just from a perception standpoint, constant refrain of Scott Frost, hot seat, and the players hear it, Scott Frost, hot seat, hot seat, hot seat. That's going to be pretty much every week of the season. And so, do you want to kind of get away from that? We've seen things go bad. We saw it with USC last year as well. When Clay got fired, that team quit. That there's no two ways about it. That team quit, and they kind of limped their way to the finish. Are Nebraska fans really going to get behind that? Do you kind of want to wait, or do you want to kind of chance it and go through that run where you are playing, much improved Purdue team? Maybe there's a chance. You know what? Those teams look so good. Maybe they'll do the talking for us, and we don't have to worry about Nebraska kind of getting on a roll. But we'll see. But it does make for a very intriguing October. There in Lincoln.
There's an argument to be made. Yeah, and you brought up Auburn too. And the last thing I'll quickly say about Auburn, because I know this is running a little bit long. I don't know if I would say moving on from Allen Green is Auburn being Auburn, because you and I knew that was coming like 7 months ago. And so did people that are not super plugged into the athletic director. I mean, I think we even joked about it with Richard was on here, right? Like that was not a surprise. Mr. Green has been looking at other jobs there for a while. Certainly, if your president and your AD are gone and your head coach barely survived a coup and you're not, I don't have a deep roster heading into the season, it would make sense. Yeah, Harson's going to have to do really well to probably keep that job. There's a case to be made. I don't know if I agree with it yet, but there's a case to be made that Nebraska might still be one of the top 3, top 2 jobs that could open up this cycle. So that maybe that gives you more flexibility to wait longer, especially because this is the favorite son, and jettisoning him would be hurtful in ways that might not be the case for a Lane Kiffin or somebody similar that doesn't have that long institutional tie. Maybe it would be different if Nebraska was entering into a coaching search era where multiple high-level SEC and Big Ten teams were likely to do so as well. I don't think right now there's a ton of teams in that Nebraska-Auburn phylum that are likely to have coaching vacancies in mid-October. Now we say that now, and who knows what the next 5 weeks are going to happen. That's a lot of time for someone to commit an NCAA violation or for some other terrible thing to happen. But that's what it looks like now. I will definitely be paying attention there. What are you watching this weekend?
Well, I just would want to follow up just briefly on that point. I mean, it does make for a very interesting coaching cell because a lot of the marquee programs have already kind of made that turnover. You know, we got new coaches at Florida, at USC. You know, Sark going into his second year. You know, plus an SEC transition. Oklahoma hiring Brent Venables. So it's like a lot of the marquee programs that would be kind of ahead of the pecking order for Nebraska. You know, they really have already made their coaching change. So you know, it does tend to be a potential kind of quieter market, I would say, in the coaching community. Certainly from not having the kind of marquee openings standpoint. Really, you're right. It's just kind of Nebraska and Auburn that are expected to come open. I think Georgia Tech is one that a lot of folks are looking at as well. Jeff Collins just the record just not there, and maybe not the on field progress they've hoped to see, and that's one of the smallest budgets, you know, in the ACC in terms of actual football spend. So there's you know, a lot of questions surrounding Georgia Tech and where that might fit into the Arizona State possibly coming open at some point during the year as well. I think there's very much an expectation that there will be changes there in Tempe, but you know what? As attractive as some of those openings are, you know, it just could be a very quiet carousel, and so I think that does make it you know, quite interesting when we do have one of those market movers like Nebraska potentially coming open earlier rather than late. Kind of seeing that be a trend as part of this cycle, but. Yeah, you know, and then speaking of you know, week one, I mean, where else can you go but Ohio State, Notre Dame? I think that is going to be the game of the week. It's, you know, obviously game days there. I'm sure you're not sweating bullets at all. You know, when Ohio State's only up 14-3, you know, in the second quarter. But
Of course, I mean, I feel that way. When in case any athletic directors are listening, and you can call up Jerry at Ohio State, and he can vouch for this. When I have covered Ohio State games in person, I have been a consummate professional. When I am watching an Ohio State game in my basement, I am swearing like a Tourette's patient. Like I am, and it's I don't even care the same way that I did like 20 years ago. Like it is different, and if I don't watch the game, like I won't be bothered. But you're right. But if it's 14-3 and Ohio State, you know, punts from like the 48, and Nebraska, and like Notre Dame has a nice return, I'm just being like, I will be rude. The Buckeyes are a 17.5-point favorite in that game. Notre Dame's coming in with some significant injuries. They're starting I think a redshirt freshman quarterback, I want to say, or just like a new, like, famous last words, because Ohio State has laid an egg in these early season big out of conference games. This is not the helmet game that I think will be the closest.
Well, I mean, the 17-point spread, I think that tells you all you have to.
Yeah. I mean, like I would think that Georgia and Oregon might actually be closer, albeit lower scoring.
Well, yeah, I mean, 17 points. I think that says it all in terms of
Florida State, LSU. That's who I was thinking of here before I was so distracted.
Yeah, well, you know, I think it is a lot of intriguing games. I mean, we were just talking about North Carolina earlier in the podcast. I mean, they're going to App State. That's going to be a terrific atmosphere there in Boone. They're probably lucky that game is earlier in the day and not a night game in Boone, because I can only imagine the kind of crowd that they would get for that. North Carolina actually is an underdog in that game now. I saw the lines move on that one. You know, Cincinnati and Arkansas, a very intriguing matchup to see what those two teams are going to look like. Obviously, kind of have rebuilding situation with Cincinnati, given the NFL talent that they've lost. But you know, Luke Fickell's got that program prime. They've recruited high level. They're very well coached. You know, we've seen Arkansas, you know, make some strides, and especially given how competitive their schedule is, they got to travel to BYU later in the year. I mean, that's a game Arkansas has to win, you know, to kind of get back into that range where they're making a bowl game and making some consistent progress. You know, Arizona, San Diego State, another very interesting game to me. I think Arizona's made a lot of progress in terms of the amount of talent they've had, and that's the San Diego State's new opening of their stadium on Big CBS, and you know, very intriguing. I think I was reading you know, just earlier, you know, about how much there's talk, certainly regarding the Title IX lawsuits and everything that's been happening at San Diego State related to Matt Ariza has been in the news, which is disappointing, I think, for a lot of Aztecs fans that I've talked with, just in terms of having such a negative story overshadow, you know, but it should be a crowning moment for that football program in terms of opening the stadium. A lot of talk about them joining potentially the Pac-12 as an expansion candidate. Like it's the biggest negative story that you can have coming at the wrong time for a university that wants to kind of celebrate the progress they've made as a football program. But that is going to be an intriguing one for me as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff. We didn't even talk about Clemson. We didn't talk about last thing, and then we'll let everybody go because this has run long. The adopted team of Extra Points, the UConn football Huskies.
Looked
pretty good. Looked pretty good. This is going to be the Twitter bit that I'm going to go out on a limb for here. Talk to your children about conventionally bad UConn. 4-win UConn. SP plus top 115 UConn. Not automatic meme UConn. They did basically turn over half of their team. Now, could their coaching staff be in a mess right now with assistants fighting each other? Could be. Would that matter necessarily with their schedule? I don't know, but I'm going out there. I liked what I saw from part of that game. I think UConn's just going to be regular bad, boring bad, not holy crap. Look at this smoldering tire fire bad. We will probably talk about some smoldering tire fire bad stuff throughout the rest of the season. You can of course follow this show on Spotify and on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts. You can find Extra Points at extrapointsmb.com. I wrote earlier this week about some updates regarding Oregon and the Big Ten and what people actually talk about with those television consultant meetings, and which I think clears up maybe some misconceptions on the internet about how media rights valuations actually work. We have some interesting new interviews on Collegiate Sports Connect that Bryan has done. We'll have some more later this week. I think that's about everything within the D1 Ticker Extended Universe. Subscribe to all of our stuff. Read it. Tell your friends. Tell your athletic director. Tell your coaches. Tell your local beat writer. Tell your parents that we make some pretty fun things. And we'll see you again very soon online.